British rule in Burma lasted from 1824 to 1948. For the Anglo-Burmese Wars, through the creation of Burma as a province of British India to the establishment of an independently administered colony, and finally independence. Various portions of Burmese territories, including Arakan, Tenasserim, were annexed by the British after the victory in the First Anglo-Burmese War. Lower Burma was annexed in 1852 after the Second Anglo-Burmese War. The annexed territories were designated the minor province, British Burma, of British India in 1862. After the Third Anglo-Burmese War in 1885, Upper Burma was annexed, and the following year, the province of Burma in British India was created, becoming a major province in 1897. This arrangement lasted until 1937, when Burma began to be administered separately by the Burma Office under the Secretary of State for India and Burma. Burma achieved independence from British rule on 4 January 1948. Burma is sometimes referred to as the Scottish colony, due to the heavy role played by Scotsmen in colonizing and running the country, one of the most notable being Sir James Scott and the Irrawaddy Flotilla Company. Divisions of British Burma. The province of Burma, after 1885, was administered as follows: Ministerial Burma, Tenasserim Division, Arakan Division, Pegu Division, Irrawaddy Division. Scheduled areas: Shan States, Chin Hills, Kachin Tracts. The frontier areas, also known as the excluded areas or the scheduled areas, compose the majority of states within Burma today. They were administered separately by the British with the Burma Frontier Service, and later united with Burma proper to form Myanmar's geographic composition today. The frontier areas were inhabited by ethnic minorities such as the Chin, the Shan, the Kachin and the Karenni. Background: the First Anglo-Burmese War arose from friction between Arakan in western Burma and British-held Chittagong to the north. After Burma's defeat of the Kingdom of Arakan in 1784–1785, in 1823, Burmese forces again crossed the frontier and the British responded with a large seaborne expedition that took Rangoon without a fight in 1824. In Danuphu, south of Ava, the Burmese general Mahabandula was killed and his armies routed. The 1826 Treaty of Yandabo formally ended the First Anglo-Burmese War, the longest and the most expensive war in British India history. 15,000 European and Indian soldiers died, together with an unknown number of Burmese army and civilian casualties. The campaign cost the British £5 million sterling to £13 million sterling that led to a severe economic crisis in British India in 1833. After 25 years of peace, the British and Burmese fighting started afresh, and lasted until the British occupied all of Lower Burma. King Mindon tried to readjust to the thrust of imperialism. He enacted administrative reforms and made Burma more receptive to foreign interests, but the British effected the Third Anglo-Burmese War, which lasted less than 2 weeks during November 1885. British troops entered Mandalay on 28 November 1885, and Burma was attached to the British Empire on 1 January 1886. Burmese armed resistance continued sporadically for several years, and the British commander had to coerce the High Court of Justice to continue to function. The British decided to annex all of Upper Burma as a colony, and to make the whole country a province of the British India. Within the Indian Empire, the new colony of Upper Burma was attached to the Burma province on 26 February 1886. Rangoon, having been the capital of British Lower Burma, became the capital of the province. Burma before the British conquest, because of its location, with trade routes between China and India passing straight through the country, Burma was kept wealthy through constant trade, although self-sufficient agriculture was still the basis of the economy. with the Indian merchants traveling along the coasts and along rivers through the country, where the majority of Burmese live. Indian cultural influences filtered into the country and still exist today. It was also one of the first Southeast Asian countries to receive Buddhism, which went on to become the officially patronized religion. Before the British conquest and colonization, the ruling Khanbom dynasty practiced a tightly centralized form of government. The king was the chief executive with the final say on all matters, but he could not make new laws and could only issue administrative edicts. The country had two codes of law, the Rajadat and Damedat, and the Lator. The center of government was divided into three branches: fiscal, executive, and judicial. In theory, the king was in charge of all of the Lator, but none of his orders got put into place until the Lator approved them, thus checking his power. Further dividing the country, provinces were ruled by governors who were all appointed by the Lator, and villages were ruled by hereditary headmen who were approved by the king. Arrival of the British in Burma. Conflict began between Myanmar and the British when the Khanbom dynasty decided to expand into Arakan in the state of Assam, close to the British possessions in India. This close contact led to the First Anglo-Burmese War, which the British won with the aid of the Siamese. Myanmar was forced to cede Assam and other northern provinces. In 1852, the Second Anglo-Burmese War was provoked by the British, who sought the teak forests in Lower Burma as well as a port between Calcutta and Singapore. The British were victorious in this war, and as a result desired access to the teak, oil and rubies of northern Myanmar. This prompted the Third Anglo-Burmese War in 1885. The British government justified their actions by claiming that the last independent king of Myanmar, Ba Min, was a tyrant and that he was conspiring to give France more influence in the country. Thus, in 1885, after 3 wars gaining various parts of the country, the British finally occupied all the area of present-day Myanmar, making the territory a province of British India. Early British rule. Burma was declared a province of India in November 1885 on the orders of the Secretary of State for India, Lord Randolph Churchill, with its capital at Rangoon, a move that ushered in a new period of economic growth. Traditional Burmese society was drastically altered by the demise of the monarchy and the separation of religion and state. Though war officially ended after only a couple of weeks, resistance continued in northern Burma until 1890, with the British finally resorting to a systematic destruction of villages and appointment of new officials to finally halt all guerrilla activity. Intermarriage between Europeans and Burmese gave birth to an indigenous Eurasian community known as the Anglo-Burmese, who would come to dominate the colonial society, hovering above the Burmese but below the British. The economic nature of society also changed dramatically. After the opening of the Suez Canal, the demand for Burmese rice grew and vast tracts of land were opened up for cultivation. However, to prepare the new land for cultivation, farmers were forced to borrow money from Indian money lenders called chettiars at high interest rates and were often foreclosed on and evicted, losing land and livestock. Most of the jobs also went to indentured Indian laborers, and whole villages became outlawed as they resorted to dacoity. While the Burmese economy grew, all the power and wealth remained in the hands of several British firms and migrants from India. The civil service was largely staffed by Anglo-Burmese and Indians, and the ethnic Burmese were excluded almost entirely from military service, which was staffed primarily with Indians, Anglo-Burmese, Karens and other Burmese minority groups. A British General Hospital Burma was set up in Rangoon, under the direction in early 1887 of Sir Patrick O'Sullivan. Though the country prospered, the Burmese people largely failed to reap the rewards. After Britain took over Burma, they maintained the sending of tribute to China, putting themselves in a lower status than in the previous relations. It was agreed in the Burma Convention in 1886 that China would recognize Britain's occupation of Upper Burma while Britain continued the Burmese payment of tribute every 10 years to Beijing administration. The British controlled the new province through direct rule, making many changes to the previous governmental structure. The monarchy was abolished, King T-Bar sent into exile, and church and state separated. This was particularly harmful because the Buddhist monks were so dependent on the sponsorship of the monarchy. At the same time, the monarchy was given legitimacy by the Buddhist organization, and the church gave the public the opportunity to understand national politics to a greater degree. Another way in which the British controlled the new colony directly was through their implementation of a secular education system. The colonial government of India, which was given control of the new colony, founded secular schools teaching in both English and Burmese, while also encouraging Christian missionaries to visit and found schools. In both of these types of schools, Buddhism and traditional Burmese culture were frowned upon in an attempt to rid the Burmese people of a cultural unity separate from the British. To control the country on the village level, the British implemented a strategic Hamlet strategy in which they burned villages and uprooted families who had supplied villages with their headmen, sending them to Lower Burma. Once these troublesome or unloyal Burmese were forced out, the British replaced them with strangers they approved of. If the British considered any Burmese to be criminals, they would act as both judge and jury, giving the Burmese no chance to a fair trial. Colonial economy. The traditional Burmese economy was one of redistribution, with the prices of the most important commodities set by the state and supply and demand mostly unimportant. Trade itself was not as important as self-sufficient agriculture, but the country's position on major trade routes from India to China meant that it did gain a fair amount of money from foreign trade passing through. With the arrival of the British, the Burmese economy became tied to global market forces and was forced to become a part of the colonial export economy. The British immediately began exploiting the rich soil of the land around the Irrawaddy Delta and cleared away the dense mangrove forests. Rice, which was in high demand in Europe, especially after the building of the Suez Canal in 1869, was the main crop grown in and exported out of Myanmar. To increase the production of rice, many Burmese migrated from the northern heartland to the delta, shifting the population concentration and changing the basis of wealth and power. To prepare land for cultivation, farmers had to borrow capital from Indian money lenders at high interest rates, as the British banks wouldn't grant mortgages. Instead, the Indian money lenders gave the mortgage loans out, but foreclosed them quickly as the rice prices and land costs soared. At the same time, thousands of Indian laborers migrated to Burma and, because of the willingness to work for less money, quickly displaced the Burmese farmers, who instead began to take part in crime, giving themselves a bad reputation. With this quickly growing economy came industrialization to a certain degree, with a railway being built throughout the valley of the Irrawaddy, and hundreds of steamboats traveling along it. All of these mechanisms of transportation were owned by the British, however, and this meant that the Burmese had to pay higher rates to transport the goods to market. Thus, although the balance of trade was supposed to be in favor of Burma, the society was changed so fundamentally that many people did not gain from the rapidly growing economy. When the British began their imperial take on Burma, the colony colony was immediately thrown into a world of exportation in which they had not ever been exposed to before colonization by the British. This massive move towards foreign trade hurt the Burmese economy initially because suddenly a large amount of the resources was being exported for Britain's benefit, thereby taking with it a lot of the resources needed by the Burmese natives to continue living the lives as they had before colonization. An account by a British official describing the conditions of the Burmese people's livelihoods in 1941 describes the Burmese hardships as they must quickly adapt to foreign trade. Foreign landlordism and the operations of foreign moneylenders had led to an increasing exportation of a considerable proportion of the country's resources and to the progressive impoverishment of the agriculturist and of the country as a whole. The peasant had grown factually poorer and unemployment had increased. The collapse of the Burmese social system led to a decay of the social conscience which, in the circumstances of poverty and unemployment, caused a great increase in crime. Quote, daily life under British rule. The British did not move in large numbers to the colony in Burma in the way they did to other possessions such as India. Instead, it was Indian workers who migrated to the country once it was under British rule, and competed with the local Burmese for jobs, lowering the standard of living in the country. The Burmese resented both the British and the Indian migrants, and staged guerrilla warfare against the British Army of Occupation. The guerrillas were led by former army officers of the Royal Burmese Army as well as other former leaders. The guerrillas fought hard against the foreigners but were often captured and punished harshly. Their actions, and the crime that began when the villages were displaced by Indian workers, led to the British impression of the Burmese colony as a restless and violent place. Nationalist movement. By the turn of the century, a nationalist movement began to take shape in the form of young men's Buddhist associations, modeled after the YMCA, as religious associations were allowed by the colonial authorities. They were later superseded by the General Council of Burmese Associations, which was linked with one Thanu Athana national associations that sprang up in villages throughout Burma proper. Between 1900 and 1911, the Irish Buddhist Udamaloka publicly challenged Christianity and imperial power, leading to two trials for sedition. A new generation of Burmese leaders arose in the early 20th century from amongst the educated classes that were permitted to go to London to study law. They came away from this experience with the belief that the Burmese situation could be improved through reform. Progressive constitutional reform in the early 1920s led to a legislature with limited powers, a university and more autonomy for Burma within the administration of India. Efforts were also undertaken to increase the representation of Burmese in the civil service. Some people began to feel that the rate of change was not fast enough and the reforms not expansive enough. In 1920, the first university students' strike in history broke out in protest against the new University Act, which the students believed would only benefit the elite and perpetuate colonial rule. National schools sprang up across the country in protest against the colonial education system, and the strike came to be commemorated as National Day. There were further strikes and anti-tax protests in the later 1920s led by the One Thanu Athins. Prominent among the political activists were Buddhist monks, such as U Ottama and U Sinda in the Arakan, who subsequently led an armed rebellion against the British and later the nationalist government after independence. And U Wisara, the first martyr of the movement to die after a protracted hunger strike in prison. In December 1930, a local tax protest by Sir San in Tharawadi quickly grew into first a regional and then a national insurrection against the government. lasting for 2 years. The Galan Rebellion, named after the mythical bird Garuda, enemy of the Nagasai, the British, emblazoned on the pennants the rebels carried, required thousands of British troops to suppress, along with promises of further political reform. The eventual trial of Sir San, who was executed, allowed several future national leaders, including Dr. Barmore in Usaw, who participated in his defense, to rise to prominence. May 1930 saw the founding of the Do-Burma-Asia Iwan, whose members called themselves Thakan. The Second University Students' Strike in 1936 was triggered by the expulsion of Aung San and Co Nu, leaders of the Rangoon University Students' Union, for refusing to reveal the name of the author who had written an article in the university magazine, making a scathing attack on one of the senior university officials. It spread to Mandalay, leading to the formation of the All Burma Students' Union. Aung San and Nu subsequently joined the Thakan movement, progressing from student to national politics. Burma separated from India. The British separated Burma province from British India in 1937 and granted the colony a new constitution calling for a fully elected assembly, with many powers given to the Burmese. But this proved to be a divisive issue, as some Burmese felt that this was a ploy to exclude them from any further Indian reforms. Barmore served as the first Prime Minister of Burma, but he was forced out by Usaw in 1939, who served as Prime Minister from 1940 until he was arrested on the 19th of January 1942 by the British for communicating with the Japanese. A wave of strikes and protests that started from the oil fields of central Burma in 1938 became a general strike with far-reaching consequences. In Rangoon, student protesters, after successfully picketing the Secretariat, the seat of the colonial government, were charged by the British mounted police wielding batons and killing a Rangoon University student called Ong Kyo. In Mandalay, the police shot into a crowd of protesters led by Buddhist monks, killing 17 people. The movement became known as Ta Aung San Ya Byeii Dorburn, and the 20th of December, the day the first martyr Ong Kyo fell, commemorated by students as Bo Ong Kyo Day. World War II. The Empire of Japan invaded Burma in 1942. This continued through 1943, when the state of Burma was proclaimed in Rangoon. Japan never succeeded in fully conquering all of the colony, however, and insurgent activity was pervasive, though not as much of an issue as it was in other former colonies. By 1945, British troops had regained control over most of the colony, for the Japanese surrender to Aung San's assassination. The surrender of the Japanese brought a military administration to Burma. British administration sought to try Aung San and other members of Beao for treason and collaboration with the Japanese. Lord Mountbatten realized that a trial was an impossibility considering Aung San's popular appeal. After the war ended, the British governor, Sir Reginald Dorman-Smith, returned. The restored government established a political program that focused on physical reconstruction of the country and delayed discussion of independence. The AFPFL opposed the government, leading to political instability in the country. A rift had also developed in the AFPFL between the Communists and Aung San, together with the Socialists, over strategy, which led to the Ntum being forced to resign as General Secretary in July 1946 and the expulsion of the CPB from the AFPFL the following October. Dorman-Smith was replaced by Sir Hubert Rance as the new governor, and almost immediately after his appointment the Rangoon police went on strike. The strike, starting in September 1946, then spread from the police to government employees and came close to becoming a general strike. Rance calmed the situation by meeting with Aung San and convincing him to join the governor's executive council along with other members of the AFPFL. The new executive council, which now had increased credibility in the country, began negotiations for Burmese independence, which were concluded successfully in London as the Aung San Attlee Agreement on the 27th of January 1947. The agreement left parts of the communist and conservative branches of the AFPFL dissatisfied, sending the Red Flag communists led by Tenasserim underground and the conservatives into opposition. Aung San also succeeded in concluding an agreement with ethnic minorities for a unified Burma at the Panglong Conference on the 12th of February, celebrated since as Union Day. Shortly after, rebellion broke out in the Arakan led by the veteran monk U Sinder, and it began to spread to other districts. The popularity of the AFPFL, now dominated by Aung San and the Socialists, was eventually confirmed when it won an overwhelming victory in the April 1947 Constituent Assembly elections. Then a momentous event stunned the nation on the 19th of July 1947. You saw a conservative pre-war Prime Minister of Burma engineered the assassination of Aung San and several members of his cabinet, including his eldest brother Ba Win, the father of today's National League for Democracy exile government leader Dr. Sein Win, while meeting in the Secretariat. The 19th of July has been commemorated since as Martyrs' Day. Thakan knew the socialist leader was now asked to form a new cabinet, and he presided over Burmese independence on the 4th of January 1948. Anti-British popular sentiment was so strong at the time that Burma opted not to join the Commonwealth of Nations. Unlike India,